So if you've watched my videos on here before, you're probably aware that most of what I post is cinematography and color grading videos. That's mostly what I do for work. I'm a cinematographer in LA and I color grade some projects. So that's what I mostly post about. But another kind of personal interest that I have is in independent and low budget filmmaking. Over the last few years, I've really been inspired by a lot of independent cinema, independent filmmakers, and also a lot of kind of no budget or like YouTube filmmakers and that sort of thing. And so over the last maybe year and a half, I've started kind of producing, directing some of my own no budget films. And I'm purposely making these films as accessible and small as possible. A lot of the projects that I do require extensive prep, extensive meetings, a lot of time just preparing to shoot the project. And I do like that process, but I also am really interested in sort of removing the barriers of entry to filmmaking. One of the great things about filmmaking is that it's such a collaborative process and that you can get a lot of people involved working towards a common goal. But at the same time, doing that requires a lot of work and a lot of money generally to get those people and resources together. So because of that, with my own personal projects, what I'm really interested in doing is stripping back a lot of those layers and getting back to the basics, which really is performance and story. So on this channel, I recently put out a short film called Got to Go, and it's an entirely improvised short film. So what does that mean? So a few months ago, I posted on my Instagram page looking for collaborators for improvised, no-budget short films. And I wasn't really sure what to expect, but to my surprise, I got a lot of people who were interested, a lot of actors, other cinematographers, directors, editors, people who I think are hungry to create and hungry to collaborate. So that was really heartwarming and also a little overwhelming because there were so many people interested and I want to work with all these people. But, you know, the nature of these projects is really, it's going to be, 2, 3, 4 people maximum working at a time. So what I decided to do was to just do a test project. So I reached out to one of the actors who had responded, who's a friend of mine, and asked if he was interested in doing one of these projects, and he was super interested. He actually had another actor friend who was interested, who he thought would be a great scene partner. So we set a date to film a few weeks later. And in the meantime, I made sure I had the right equipment ready to make this project happen. So as a DP, I already have a camera package. I have kind of a basic audio package. But one thing that I decided I needed was some lav mics. I'd been listening to a lot of podcasts and a lot of YouTube videos about no budget filmmaking. And when it comes to audio, the general advice seems to be to just lav the actors. Let those roll. And that way you're really eliminating needing like a boom pole and like a dedicated audio mixer. And for the sake of this project, I just wanted it to be as small as possible, meaning me and the actors. It's really easy to start ballooning out your crew and getting a lot of people on set. And so I wanted to specifically make this just myself and the actors. So I would be directing, shooting, and running audio, pulling my own focus, all of that at the same time. Trying to simplify a few of the aspects of the project to make that more accessible for me. So I already own a couple cameras. I have the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera that's filming me right now. And then I have my Red Komodo. And for this project, I decided to try it on the Red just because I prefer the image that comes out of that. And really, it's not that much bigger than the Blackmagic. And I think that was a good idea and a bad idea, and we'll kind of get into that later. So I made a really stripped down camera package for this. I wanted to avoid any sort of significant camera support. I knew it would be handheld, but I didn't want to go with an easy rig because we'd be filming in public and it just attracts a lot of attention, and we wanted this to be as minimal as possible. I decided to shoot on one lens, which was this Zeiss Jenna 35mm prime, very small lens, very compact. That made it really easy and I could pull my own focus with it. It's also a really gorgeous lens. It's one of my favorite lenses that I own. Just has amazing, beautiful flares, a really nice fall off, decently fast. It's at 2.4. So just all around a pretty great lens. And if I'm only gonna shoot on one lens, it's often a 35 on Super 35 format. I just love that field of view and that depth, just kind of a perfect lens for me. So now I had my camera package figured out and it was time to go shoot.
Hi.
So on the day of shooting, we scheduled a time to meet up. We didn't know where we'd be filming or really any details before we met up, even though I had a few ideas in my mind. But I knew that if we were going to shoot an exterior, which seemed pretty likely, that it'd be better to film that towards sunset. So we met early afternoon at a coffee shop near my house, and I had met Peter, one of the actors, before, but I had not met Theodora, who's the other actor in the film. So we all just met up, had a coffee, got to know each other a little bit, and then started to figure out what resources we had available to us as far as locations and what characters that Peter and Theodora could sort of naturally fit into. Conveniently, Peter is from New Zealand and Theodora is from Australia. And apparently there are different accents there that I can't really pick up on, but they were able to kind of find a middle ground accent-wise and determine that they would definitely be able to play brother and sister. So once we kind of had those characters figured out, the other thing we figured out as far as character and story was just sort of the central conflict of the story. And this is where I'll go ahead and say that if you haven't seen the film yet, I'd recommend watching that first because we'll start to get into the story. And, it's probably better to watch the film before we talk about it. As far as my involvement in guiding this process, I was just there to help bounce off ideas, but I really wanted the actors to lead the discussion as far as character and story. So they settled on these brother and sister characters, and from there they went on to discuss what the conflict or the central crux of the story would be. And what they ended up with is that they're both living in the United States on visas, on green cards, and that Peter's character was getting his green card revoked and would have to go back to New Zealand. And so now we had our two characters and our central conflict of the story. And the last thing to decide for us before we went and started shooting was just where we were going to shoot. So since we were meeting in my neighborhood, I knew of the area pretty well and had a few options in mind. Obviously, we could come shoot in my apartment if we wanted to, but I didn't necessarily want to do that. I didn't feel super inspired by that. But another idea I had was shooting in a park that's also near my apartment. And it's a pretty wide open space and relatively quiet, so I knew that we would probably be able to film there relatively undisturbed. And now it was getting towards late afternoon and the light was getting really pretty, and I just thought it would be great to film outside. So we decided on the park, and after doing a quick costume discussion and figuring out wardrobe, we drove over to the park and started setting up. So once we got there, we just mic'd up the actors and then kind of quickly walked through just like a rough blocking of where we wanted to start the action and where we wanted them to land. And this is kind of where I was most influential as far as making sure that the blocking would work for lighting and for camera. And I think it was really important to just walk through that so that I could be aware of how I wanted to cover the scene and where kind of the 180 line would live, making sure that they were falling in good light, and also deciding the order of coverage that I wanted to capture. But yeah, once they were mic'd up and we had walked through the blocking, we just kind of went right into the first take. And we had not done any discussion about sort of the trajectory of the story. I think they had sort of chatted about their characters a little bit more in depth, but I was not aware of where this story was going to go. But yeah, that was kind of the whole point, is I just wanted to start shooting and let them improvise and see what naturally came of it. And I really emphasized that the first few takes are when we could really experiment. So we were going to do a few takes of the wide shot, and if they wanted to go in a totally different direction between takes, they definitely could. And then we would sort of pick and choose from that what we wanted to continue covering from there. So again, we shot this on my red Komodo with a 35mm lens, and we were shooting wide open with hard ND in the matte box. So one of the challenges there is that I was essentially locked into an exposure. I could always stop down a little bit, but if I needed more light, it just wasn't going to happen. So we started by shooting a wide shot, and I think we did 2 or 3 takes of this.
How's it sound? All good?
Yeah, I think we're good. Ready?
All right, cool.
Okay.
What do you mean you didn't just get the letter? How long have you known about this?
And I was instantly kind of getting goosebumps. Like, they were creating such an amazing dynamic between their characters, and just this ebb and flow of kind of tension and conflict, and this sort of like sibling dynamic of making little jabs at each other and, giving each other shit. And right away I knew, like, wow, these two know exactly where they want to go with this and are creating some amazing stuff that I could have never wrote. Like, I'm not necessarily a strong writer, And I definitely know I could not write something like this. Like, this is outside of my wheelhouse. So I just felt lucky to be there and kind of capturing and witnessing this performance. And again, it's a huge testament to Peter and Theodora. They're just incredible actors, incredible improvisers, and just truly professionals at what they do. After we did the wide a couple times, I decided that we were going to shoot Theodora's single coverage next. And this was primarily because as the sun was still, getting kind of high in the sky above the tree line, Peter was just sort of getting front lit, blasted by the sun when we were looking at him. So I wanted to shoot out Theodora's coverage first while she had a nice backlight. And then when we finished that, we'd flip around, get Peter's coverage, and he'd have a little more softer ambient light. So what we had discussed in our blocking rehearsal was that we'd go from kind of point A where they meet up to point B, which was the tree. But then they made a great decision to, when the conversation kind of hit a stopping point, to move locations, and they moved under another tree. And this brings me back to me being locked into a fixed exposure, because the difference of the intensity of the light from when they're directly in the sun to when they're under a shaded tree was massive. But that being said, I didn't want to cut and change ND. I didn't want to break the flow of the scene. So I just said, this can be imperfect, let's roll with it. And I just kept filming. So after Theodora's coverage, then we shot Peter's coverage. I got a single of him. And at this point, the sun had dipped low enough where that when he hit that first location by the tree, he was now mostly in shade and actually was getting just sort of this nice like glow from the diffused light from the trees. And if you watch it, it's like kind of obvious that he's front lit in one thing and then softly lit in the next shot. But to me, that doesn't really matter. As long as it's gonna look good on each angle, then I'm fine with it. You'll also notice that they make this conversation about a helicopter flying over.
Is that a military helicopter?
I don't know.
And that's because that really happened while we were shooting. And that was one thing I emphasized ahead of time was, we're not gonna cut unless something catastrophic happens, like if the camera shuts down or somebody twists their ankle. Like, we're not gonna cut, just roll with it, embrace whatever is happening environmentally, and that'll just add to the story. Because if you wrote in a helicopter flying overhead as part of the scene, that would be expensive, but it just happened and it's just sort of fun and part of the story now, and so it worked out. So in these singles, again, I still faced the same exposure issues once they moved under that tree. And I could see detail on the monitor, but like I knew we were deep in the toe of the image. I knew things were very underexposed. And so I actually did ask for one more take of Peter where I changed the ND slightly, just to give it a little bit more exposure and to hopefully recover some of that data in post. But once we did the wide and the two singles and did a couple takes of each of those, we were essentially done. We did maybe a couple little pickups, but we captured all of this within the span of probably 90 minutes. Like, we were in and out of there really quick. And at that point we were losing the light. And so I knew we were just going to be done filming. It was just sort of this like high on set of creating something so organic, so raw, so real. And it kind of felt like a magic trick, like we were just pulling something out of thin air. And I think that was really rewarding for all of us. Like, for me, it was so cool to see that come to life and to challenge myself to react on the fly. And for the actors, I think it was a fun, like, kind of change of pace. A lot of times on a film set, you're memorizing lines, you're doing what the director tells you, and there may be some room for improvisation or for your own ideas. But they were almost like the directors and the writers of this piece. Like, they were the ones who were crafting it from the ground up. And they expressed to me that that just like felt really good to do. Like, it was a great creative exercise and that they felt kind of empowered by that. And for me, that's awesome. Like, again, I'm not a writer, and I'd rather let people with their own creative ideas bring those things to the table and just sort of let me tweak and guide the ship a little bit, but really to let it be their idea. And so we really wrapped feeling great, and just like, regardless of how it would turn out in the edit, I think we just felt good about the process and about what we had just done.
Where'd you park the car?
So once we got into the edit, this is where I had to do a lot of just sort of crafting and chiseling down of the story into what it ended up being. The main beats of the story were the same as what we shot on the day, but I would just sort of reorganize lines, change reactions, like just, normal editing things that help you craft the story. And ultimately, I just tried to make it as tight as possible, as to the point as possible, and not drag it out more than it needed to be. Of course, with all the blocking, it did create some challenges of if I needed to, cut down a line or cut to a reaction, the physical position of the characters had to make sense. So that's what's like challenging about creating this scene with all of this blocking rather than just doing this whole thing like on a park bench. So it took me a little while to edit together, and I was actually doing it all in color up until like the very last moment. Like the day before I was done, I decided to put it in black and white. And I liked how it looked in color, but there was just something about the black and white that just felt kind of nostalgic and kind of fit the story really well, in my opinion. And there was a few weird things, like I had some kind of weird ghosting flares happening at one point, and I think the black and white just sort of tied that all together, and the like more high contrast, like direct sun look really works well in black and white. So I'm really happy that I went that direction, even though that wasn't the original intent. Before I was finished, I did send it to the actors for notes, and they were really happy, and pretty much we didn't have a lot of corrections to make. But I did several rounds of edits, just tightening things up until I reached the final piece. So what did I learn?
Maybe I didn't want to tell you because I wanted things to be normal, okay?
So this is my first time doing a fully improvised film like this. I did another project last year that is currently being submitted to festivals, which was scripted. I did write that, and then there was a good amount of improvisation on set. But this was a different thing because we conceptualized and executed the whole thing within one day. And I definitely learned a lot by doing this. I will say, first of all, I definitely want to do this again. Like, it really made me excited about the potential of a project like this, and actually really made me want to take this and take it to the next step and maybe shoot a feature like this, because I think it's super feasible to shoot a block at a time over a few months, and by the end of that you have like a full-length film, which is really exciting. So the first thing I really learned was audio. I think the lav mics were a really excellent choice. If I had the opportunity to have like a true audio professional on set, I do think that would make a really vast difference. Like, I think they would capture this way better than I was able to. It does add a complicating factor of having one more person on set, but I think if I were to do this again or do this in a bigger scale, like on a feature, I think I would want one more person on set who would just be really flexible, could help with audio, could monitor audio because that's a challenge, and just sort of help with like sort of the moving things, just the little things that need to be done on set. I would also make sure that I have a variable exposure. I was able to pull up all of that information out of the camera in post, but I think it would be better to just have kind of like a variable ND, even if it compromises the image a little bit, just that flexibility, because it was just difficult moving from those vastly different exposure settings and being kind of unsure if I'd be able to recover that information in post. I think ultimately it had like a cool look to it when I pulled all that information back and did a little bit of denoising to it. Especially in the black and white, I think that helped mask some of the like color noise that emerged. But ultimately, it's probably smarter and faster not to have to do hard ND swaps and just have like a variable ND in front of the lens. I would probably also simplify the camera. I liked working with the red, but there are just requirements that come with that make it just that much more complicated as far as simplicity on set. Just the battery requirements, it pulls a lot more power than the Blackmagic. Media requirements, I can shoot ProRes, but it's still kind of chews through a good amount of data. Exposure wise, it's locked kind of to one native ISO versus the Blackmagic that has a low native and a high native, so that flexibility would be nice. And also, it's a similarly sized camera, but it is like a heavier camera. And because I didn't want to use an easy rig, my arms were, even with like a tiny prime lens and, a really lightweight matte box and small nano batteries, there's like shake in the film that you can see because my arms are just getting tired from doing kind of like 15-minute takes, like 5 or 6 15-minute takes in a row. And so I think simplifying down to as small of a camera as possible, as flexible of a camera as possible. I think something like an FX3 even, it's, hate to say it, but would be kind of a great option for this sort of thing. Very, very small and flexible. The Blackmagic to some extent still requires a bit of rigging to make usable. But since these are the cameras that I have, I think moving forward, I would definitely be strongly considering going with the Blackmagic. I knew this ahead of time, but I also definitely learned to trust the performers. Give them space to do what they need to do, to explore, and just make small corrections along the way that helps capture those performances better or if I have an idea that's going to make the story better, I'll definitely throw it out. But I was just so amazed by what these actors brought to the table, and they did something vastly better than I could have ever came up with, so trust the performance. Also a technical thing, but just be aware of the 180 line. There was a couple moments where I found myself kind of accidentally caught on the wrong side of the line, and just thinking back to like where the previous takes had been, there was a moment when they moved under the tree, but what I realized was that I was now shooting kind of into the key side of their face, and so I wanted to move to shooting into the shadow side, and so I chose like a key moment in the story to do that, and it actually worked out really well, and I'm so glad I ended up on that side of the line. But that being said, it was like a big challenge. So just being aware of the 180 line, maybe simplifying the blocking would be helpful. Although I like the movement and I like the challenge of trying to cut that together. But there's a couple like cheeky moments where I have to like flip the shot in post for a reaction because I need the eye line and I need that reaction. So it just became a bit of a headache, but it's a good exercise and it helps you be aware of like where the 180 is and reacting to that on the fly. And the last thing I'll say is that I learned to just not be afraid of leaning into imperfection. We had a lot of, weird sound things, weird lighting things that I would normally stop, cut, and try to fix. But because of the really minimal nature of this project, I just decided to let some of that go and lean into it and see what came of it. I think it's useful not only because it helps the flow of the performance, but also because it allows you to try new things. Like, who knows, maybe hard sunlight in the face at the right angle at the right time of day can actually look really nice. Maybe putting the camera really low because you're resting it on your hip and shooting up at somebody actually looks really nice. Or maybe shooting 4 stops under and then pulling it back out in post makes it look really nice. Like, it's hard to say. And this is an opportunity to try those new things and see if it works, if it doesn't. And either way, you're creating something and you're gonna have a film one way or another. So try these things and keep some of it for the next one, get rid of it for the next one. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's just about experimentation and just, creating something brand new out of nothing. So yeah, I know this is something a little bit different from my normal content, but I will say like this got me really excited, and I'm already looking forward and planning to do another one of these projects. So if you have any questions about the process or any thoughts on the film, I would encourage you to go check out the film on YouTube. It's on my channel and I'll link it here. But yeah, feel free to leave a comment. You can follow me on Instagram, which will also be linked below. And I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks.